Hi everyone, it's Paula Edgar and welcome back to Branding Room Only. Today, in honor of Memorial Day, I invite you to join me in reflection. To honor those who have made the ultimate sacrifice through their military service, and also to revisit our shared commitments to truth, leadership, and the rule of law. There is no better guide for that reflection than in this re-release of my conversation with another Paula, my friend and name twin, Paula Boggs. She is an Army veteran, a former White House and Pentagon attorney, the former chief legal officer at Starbucks, and a creative force in music, leadership, and public service. In a time when our values as a society are being tested, this conversation is a powerful reminder of the impact of authenticity, resilience, and using your voice to lead with purpose. Listen in and honor the journey of service, identity, and lasting impact that Paula shares. See you in a bit. Welcome to the Branding Room Only podcast, where we share career stories, strategies, and lessons learned on how industry leaders and influencers have built their personal brands. Now, let's get started with the show. Hi, y'all. It's Paula Edgar, your host of Branding Room Only, and I'm so excited today because you have Paula times two. My guest today is Paula Boggs, and she is the founder of Boggs Media LLC and the Paula Boggs Band. A little bit about Paula. For over a generation, Paula Boggs has created career paths through the military, law, and now music, uniquely and authentically hers. After stints in the Pentagon and the White House as an Army officer, Paula reached the pinnacle of law, serving a decade as Starbucks' chief legal officer. Since leaving Starbucks in 2012, this pioneering Black woman has fronted the genre-defying Paula Boggs Band while also mentoring others, giving speeches, serving on boards, writing essays, and co-raising her niece, who's now a junior at Cornell University. Paula, welcome to the Branding Room.
Thank you, Paula. It's so great to be here.
It's so weird to call somebody else Paula. Well, I'm so excited to talk to you today. I start off with the same question to everyone, so I want to ask you this. What does personal branding mean to you? How do you define it?
Sure. Well, for me, it is really my public identity. It's my image, my story, how I show up in the world. And if I'm doing it right, my personal identity is in harmony with the public one.
Alignment is important. Definitely. Tell me this. How would you describe Paula Boggs in 3 words or short phrases?
Oh, that's a fun one. I would say maverick, energetic, and kind.
Oh, maverick. Oh, I love that. Okay. I love that. Okay. Do you have a favorite quote or motto?
I do. And of course, this changes from time to time, but right now, my favorite one is from Maya Angelou. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time.
Ooh, yeah, that is a good one. That is a good one. That's across board. I'm thinking like at work, at home. And yep, that's a good one. That is a good one. Okay, so this question for you, especially as a musician, I'm like, oh, I can't wait. What is your hype song? So if they are going to get full Paula Boggs, 100%, what is the song that's playing in your head when you're going into whatever the thing is? Or if you're having a bad day, what song is going to lift you up and take you to the place where you feel better? And it can be the same song or different ones.
It is 100% the same song, and it is Jill Scott's Golden.
Oh, yes. I love it. I love it. That is such a fantastic song. I mean, it really is. It just brings you joy.
It just brings you joy.
Mm-hmm. It does. All right. Well, let's jump into your background. So where did you grow up and how do you think it shaped your brand?
The question of where did you grow up is more complicated for me than most people, but I think the ingredients of that really tell the story of everything that came after. So I was literally born on a college campus, Howard University. It was called Freedman's Hospital at the time. My parents met as students there. My mom is from DC, and I actually think it is prophetic that I was literally born on an HBCU campus, right? And so after my dad received his PhD in zoology from Howard, we relocated to Virginia, where he taught at Virginia State, then college, now Virginia State University, an HBCU. And that era of my life is important in a couple of significant ways, because it was the first time in my life I was a minority within many minority groups. Okay. Oh. So what do I mean by that? So, this is setting the table, the stage. This is Jim Crow, Virginia. So segregation is still alive and well. I'm that old. So it was still a thing. And against that backdrop, I was literally living on a college campus. So my world of Black people was a world of extremely highly educated Black people. Everybody I knew who was Black had a PhD, or a master's degree, or, was a kid like me whose parents had those credentials and were teaching at an historically Black college. So my whole definition of what it means to be Black was largely shaped by being a toddler in that setting. But that wasn't the only way I was, a minority within a minority. My family was, or at least my dad was, Roman Catholic. And so Black Catholics are a minority within the Catholic faith. We are also a minority within the African American community, right? And so I learned very early in life how to navigate diversity and difference, being the one who was different, right? in these settings. And for me, the religion thing was even more complex, but I think instructive, because my mom was not Catholic. She was African Methodist Episcopal. And so every other week I would toggle between the Catholic Church and the AME Church.
Really? Wow.
Learning how to be equally comfortable within both those faith traditions. And if you listen to the music of Paula Boggs Band in 2024, you can still see and hear the influences of both the Roman Catholic Church and the AME Church in the music I write and we perform.
Wow. Wow. I'm a little bit shocked. I'm like, wow, you were going every other week. Oftentimes people will tell us stories of having parents who had different religions, and, it'd be like, oh, we celebrate Christmas and we celebrate Hanukkah. Oh, you know what I mean? But doing that at such a consistent cadence too, it must have been really interesting and definitely helped with your being able to be fluid in both those places. I think that is, wow. That's the first time anyone has ever answered the question the way I'm like, wow. Okay. So did you grow up through college staying in Virginia, or did you go anywhere else?
Oh, absolutely not. That would be too boring, right? So when I was 13, my parents split up, and my mom, in one of the most courageous acts I know of in my lifetime, took herself and her 4 children, me being the oldest, out of the United States, out of the segregated South, out of the United States. We moved to Europe, where she became a teacher for the children of military personnel. And when we got on that plane, leaving Virginia, heading to Germany, we were entering 2 worlds we knew absolutely nothing about. The first was the US military. We had never been around the military before that, and knew nothing about that life, that culture. And secondly, we knew nothing about Germany. We had never lived or even traveled even to Canada. I mean, we had never been outside the United States. And so both those things happened, and automatically we were in a world we did not know, where we were, for the first time, living in settings where our neighbors were of different races. We were attending school where everything was integrated, where we shopped, where we socialized. For the first time in my life, white girls were coming over to my house to spend the night, and vice versa. That had never happened in Virginia. It couldn't happen in Virginia because of segregation. And honestly, I didn't even know interracial couples were possible. I didn't even know that could be a thing. It was so otherworldly, and yet it was so common when we got to Europe. And so there was so much new, so much we had to navigate. And because of that, I became very, very comfortable with navigating different cultures and learning what the culture is and figuring out how not to be the new kid, because I attended 3 different high schools in 2 countries, because we moved from Germany to Italy for a year, and then we moved back to Germany. And each time I had to figure out, and did figure out, how to fit in, how to read the culture, how to not seem exotic, even though objectively I was. And so those skills, those tools, I really had not thought about them consciously, but I was internalizing them. And as an adult, they continue to show up and aid me as I navigated through the military law, and now music, often as the first or only in a setting.
That is, to be a teenager, that is, the culture shock must have been wild to go from. That is fascinating. It speaks so much volumes about how resilient really you must be, in addition to creative, right, and observant, I'm sure, in terms of being able to figure out, okay, who do I need to connect with? What are they doing? Wow. Okay. It's why I love this podcast, because we would never get into all of this over, at a cocktail party. But this is why I'm like, I selfishly just want everybody to hear all the conversations that I have with people who I admire. And you are definitely one of them. And that, without even knowing that is, wow. Okay. So that's how you grew up.
That's how I grew up.
So then take me from your, teenage and getting and going to college, et cetera, to the military, right? And then to your career in law. Tell me about your career journey.
Yes. So as a high schooler, I was living on and around military bases. And so it really wasn't that big a leap for someone like me to consider having the military pay for my college education, and that's exactly what I did. So I am of the era where, for the first time, opportunities were opening for women, be it Title IX. I'm of that first generation of women to benefit from Title IX. And so I ran high school track and played other sports in ways that the generation before me was unable to. And so as a high school senior, I was applying for scholarships, including military scholarships, that valued that part of me too. I was an athlete as well as a scholar. And so I applied for, got accepted into the U.S. Naval Academy, was one of the first women to receive an appointment to Annapolis. But I turned that down for a 4-year Army ROTC scholarship at Johns Hopkins, studying international studies, which would, of no surprise for someone like me who had just lived in Europe for 5 years. By that time, studying international studies was a natural fit for me. And so that's what I did. Went off to college. My family, except for my dad, were still in Europe. And so, I navigated that. I joke with my niece, these days it's a given that, parents, if they can, accompany their kids to college and whatnot. But not me. I got on a plane by myself in Frankfurt, Germany, and flew to Baltimore, Washington International Airport by myself. And then my uncle picked me up and took me to Johns Hopkins. So a wholly different experience than many kids who go to college get these days. But I did my 4 years there, and then truthfully, I looked for a delay strategy in going into the Army active duty, and law school was it. So between my junior and senior year of college, I went to airborne school. I became, paratrooper. I jumped out of planes. I learned how to jump out of planes despite being afraid to this day of heights. And so, that's a whole different story. But I did that. I went to what the Army calls advanced camp, where cadets, college students play Army for 6 weeks. And so for 9 weeks, I had been in this situation where someone had, told me when to get up, go to bed, what to wear, how to eat. I get back to college and realize I'm not ready. I am so not ready for active duty. And so it was like, okay, yeah, but you're at Hopkins. Let's see if you can figure out a delay strategy. And so the delay strategy for me was, okay, LSATs are first. I'll take them and see how that plays out. If I do well, I'll go to law school for 2 reasons. It's 2 years. I mean, it's 3 years versus 2 for a master's. And I'll go in as a lawyer versus, a quartermaster officer or something like that, right?
Yes.
And so that was my strategy. And if that didn't work, I was going to take, the GMATs. So LSATs were first. I took them. I did fine. And so I applied and ended up at UC Berkeley School of Law, which I thought was, first of all, kind of a joke because it was a delay strategy. But secondly, I thought smugly and wrongly that, unlike 99% of my classmates who didn't have a clue what they were going to be doing after graduating from law school, I knew that I was going to serve, 4 years in the Army. Well, I did serve 4 years in the Army, but I didn't have a clue what that 4 years was going to be. And it ended up being well beyond my wildest imagination, including being in the Reagan White House working on the Iran-Contra investigation, which was my first job as a lawyer. Now, your listeners and viewers must understand, because it sounds kind of storybook,
Mm-hmm.
but the fact of the matter is, I failed the bar a couple times right
Mm.
out of the gate, and so I almost didn't become a lawyer, and it was only through chutzpah, really, that I was able to talk myself into jobs I was wholly unqualified for once I failed the bar, so that I could stay in the Pentagon, which is where I started, that ultimately led me to the White House. But it was failure
Mm.
that forced me to be extremely entrepreneurial and to learn the art of talking my way into jobs that either didn't exist when I
Mhm.
was, imagining them and trying to sell the idea to somebody, or they existed, but I was not traditionally qualified for that job. And so had to, apropos of what you're talking about on your podcast, I had to sell myself
Mhm.
as someone who, despite not meeting, the bullets of the description, nonetheless was someone they should hire, right? And
Wow. Yes, that's
for your
the
yeah,
brand
for
has
your
to be strong.
listeners, what that meant for me,
Mhm.
and hopefully what it means for whoever's listening to this and watching it, is this: we are often more capable of doing something than we initially imagine, right? And for me, as a leader, if you fast forward a generation, because I began my career that way, I was far more open
Mm.
as a leader to try to see that in somebody else, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I know we're going to talk later about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mhm.
At the heart of my passion
Mhm.
for it was the personal experiences that I had had early in my career, where somebody or somebodies
Mhm.
took a chance on me,
Yeah.
an untraditional candidate for whatever it was they were considering me for.
Mm. And you had navigated so many spaces in which you understood that diversity was a benefit and allowed you to be, you know, adaptable and resilient and creative and all those things. And really, every single step that you've walked us through thus far is a testament to how understanding grit, resilience, and diversity, how they can be a benefit to any person, any candidate, any situation. So of course, I'm really glad that that was a takeaway that you pulled out, because it's so true. So okay, you Pentagoning it up, you're doing all the stuff in the government, and then what?
Yeah. So then I got a textbook lesson in mentoring and sponsorship. So my good fortune early in my career was someone did that for me, and I knew the difference. So I'm at the White House. I'm, working, around the clock, as you might imagine, because, that White House was in crisis mode during Iran-Contra, which, at the time was the biggest scandal since Watergate,
Mm-hmm.
in a White House. So, here we are. And parenthetically,
Yeah.
this is Reagan's White House. We're not talking Clinton or
Right.
Obama or something like that. So I was, I was the only professional Black woman I
Mm-hmm.
saw the entire time I was, at the White House. And, if there was somebody else, I never saw them. And the only professional Black man I saw was Colin Powell. So
Mm-hmm.
that, just setting the table here on the era. So, by definition, my boss was a white guy,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a middle-aged white guy. And the important mentoring lesson here is because he became both a mentor and sponsor
Mm-hmm.
for me, is this. I have learned both as a beneficiary of mentoring and as one who has mentored.
Mm-hmm.
Mentoring is a transactional thing, right? So a mentor isn't going to be invested
Mm-hmm.
in the mentee unless the mentor believes he or she's getting something out of it too. And part of it is seeing, a younger them
Mm-hmm.
in the person they're mentoring. So, at the time I was a, 20 something skinny Black woman with oversized glasses and nothing cool about me. Right. Meanwhile, he was your quintessential preppy middle-aged white guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Complete with the button down collar and the whole 9 yards.
Uh-huh.
And so on the surface, there wouldn't appear to be a lot in common between him and me,
Uh-huh.
but we learned there was. And the thing was, we were both Roman Catholic. Okay.
Ah.
And the thing about Catholicism is as much a culture as a religion,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's certain milestones. If you're Catholic, you know them. And if you've attended Catholic school,
Mm-hmm.
which I did, first through sixth grade, and he did his
Mm-hmm.
entire 12 years pre-college, we both knew that nuns can be domestic terrorists, regardless of whether, you're in, segregated Virginia, where I was,
Mm-hmm.
or St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
where he was, right? And so we bonded over these stories. And, before you knew it, and I was doing a good job, he could see the younger him in me, despite, the superficial differences
Mm-hmm.
in, who we were.
Right.
And that benefited me on a couple of major levels. The first is this was the mentoring. So Bill Litton is his name. Bill says to me, Paula, what are you going to do when you grow up? In other words, when you complete your military commitment, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I don't know, but I'm moving to Seattle. Now, I had fallen in love with Seattle for a variety of reasons while in law school.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that information, he says, I think you should become a federal prosecutor. I think you should become an assistant U.S. attorney. Why is that, Bill? And he, patiently goes through the case for what he has seen in me that leads him, a venerated federal prosecutor. By the time Bill had come to the White House, he
Mm-hmm.
had been, a prosecutor of renown,
Mm-hmm.
which is why the White House brought him in.
Mm-hmm.
And so he saw those things in me. That was nowhere on my map of what I was going to do next, but he talked me into it, at the end of which I said, well, Bill, that's really interesting, but I'm moving to Seattle, right? We're in DC at the
Mm-hmm.
White House. I'm moving to Seattle, 3,000 miles away. And he says, well, they have federal prosecutors in Seattle. And with that, the mentoring became sponsorship,
Mm-hmm.
because what Bill did was he reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Seattle and persuaded them on his say so to
Mm-hmm.
do something they had never done in the history of the U.S. Attorney's Office, which was to hire someone, me, with zero trial experience. I had never tried or been anywhere close
Wow.
to a courtroom. Bill knew I was, for a kid, I was an ace investigator. I knew how to put puzzles together, and he saw that in me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he knew how I presented, and I had the good fortune of presenting to really important people, including the vice president and the president. But I had never stepped foot in a courtroom before the U.S. Attorney's Office took a leap on me. And they trained me. I became a good assistant U.S. attorney, but I was a rank rookie when I first got there. And they never would have given me the time of day but for Bill.
Mm.
So very early in my career, I learned the difference.
Yeah.
I learned what the
Sponsorship.
mentoring was,
Wow.
and I learned what the sponsorship
Yeah.
was.
Sponsorship is putting yourself, your brand on the line to do it, aligning with someone else's. And it's like a hand holding. I always say that if you're mentoring somebody, they can mess up and it won't come back on you. But if you're sponsoring somebody, people will look at you sideways because that's your person. And you have, like it said, I'm going to give you all of my street cred, all of my influence in order for you to have opportunities, et cetera. So, and that's a perfect example of that happening for someone's benefit, because to take that kind of, I would say it's probably a calculated, really good risk, but still a risk.
It's still a
Someone
risk.
without that experience and say, okay, yes, because you said so, we will do this. That's fantastic. Wow. Yeah. Woo. Okay. Then Starbucks.
No.
I am like, this is so fascinating.
Oh, not at all. Starbucks is way down the road from that. My career is far more checkered
I love
than
wow.
that. I was an assistant U.S. attorney 5 years,
Mhm.
loved it, but the thing about and for anybody who has been a federal prosecutor, what I'm about to say is true. There are really two kinds of federal prosecutors. They're either the ones who do it for 3 to 5 years and then move on to something else, or the lifers. And I knew I wasn't lifer material for anything, and so I was in the 3 to 5 year camp, and at 5 years I got a great opportunity to return to DC for a year. The scandal of that time was Tailhook, the incident arising in the Department of Navy, where there had been an event where a variety of sexual misconduct acts took place.
Mm-hmm.
And a brave woman, another Paula Coughlin, raised her hand and was the whistleblower for what had gone down at Tailhook. And that led to several investigations that were not satisfactory to the U.S. Congress, shall we say, which led to them creating this thing called the Advisory Board on the Investigative Capability of Department of Defense. And I was its staff director. It was chaired by the late Chuck Ruff, who later became Clinton's White House counsel. And we did our work for a year, made findings and recommendations. And then I returned to Seattle, joined a private firm, big firm, at the time was called Preston Gates and Ellis, the Gates being Microsoft, Bill Gates' father. That wasn't really my cup of tea. That was not my calling. I did it for a couple years, and that was enough for me to understand what I needed in a job to be fulfilled and what I was not getting in the firm. I needed to be in a setting that was more team oriented, more mission oriented, where it was bigger than me. And so I decided that for someone like me, if it wasn't government, it meant being in-house. Okay. And so with that, I left the firm, got an opportunity to join Dell Computer Corporation. So moved from Seattle to Austin, became Dell's first Black female executive in its history. And the Black guy who came before me got there, I think, 6 weeks before me. So, he officially was the first, but I was close behind him. And I was also that company's first openly gay executive. So I was, breaking ground left and right at Dell, and did that for 5 years before becoming Starbucks General Counsel, and doing that for 10 years.
Wow. I mean, well, let's just keep it real. You've been breaking ground for your whole life. In my mind right now, I'm like, if I have a problem, I should just, whatever it is, I should tell Paula, because she will be able to figure it out. Because my goodness, that is, what a career. And now tell me about the jump from, okay, well, no, let me ask them. I'm going to go backwards. How long have you been a musician?
Yes. So I started, how long have I been a musician that I own, right? As opposed to my parents forcing me to do something I wasn't entirely bought into. So, they had the great insight to expose all of their children to music at an early age. And so I began with piano. I didn't like it. I realize now I didn't like the teacher, but nonetheless, I didn't. And I tried a couple different things before landing on guitar at age 10. And part of that was due to where I was. I was in Catholic school during a time when folk music was emerging in the Catholic Church. And so I absorbed all of that. And within a relatively short period, I was writing music. So from age 10 through, I would say, age 30-ish, less and less over time, I was still performing and writing music. I think the biggest break for me in terms of just not doing music anymore, not performing it, not writing it, was when I left the Catholic Church in my early 30s, because that had been an outlet for me to continue to perform, even, as my law career climbed. But once that was in my rear view mirror, music pretty much was too. I was still an aficionado. I love music and a diverse array of it, but performing it, writing it, no. And that was my story for about 15 years as, I was doing other stuff, right? President Gates, Dell.
Like a couple of things that made you busy. It's all good.
Yes. But, I really want your readers and viewers and listeners to come away with this. At least in my life experience, nothing has been a straight line. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And I would not have predicted a return to music, but life's funny that way. And in my case, back in 2005, my youngest brother's wife was killed in a car accident, leaving my brother and a 2-year-old, Jada, who we eventually helped raise. And my wife really urged me to pick up the guitar as a way to grieve. And so I did. But once I did, I was re-engaged with an instrument I've always loved. And it wasn't long after picking up the guitar again, I learned about a 1-year course offered by the University of Washington, their extension program in songwriting. I auditioned, urged by my wife, and got in. And so for a year, I was part of a community of songwriters, actually for the first time. And at the end of that year, so we're in 06 now, my teacher pulled me aside and said, it was a mentoring moment. She said, Paula, I really think you have something with songwriting, and what a shame it would be if you didn't keep going. Now, for me, I'm Starbucks General Counsel. I've got, a really serious, Starbucks, more than tripled in size during the decade I was there. And so I didn't know what, quote, keep going was going to mean, for someone like me. But I decided at the beginning of 07 that it could mean me doing one open mic a month. Okay. And that's what it became for me. And in that sort of journey, I met a couple of musicians one of whom we still play together. And by the beginning of 08, we had our first gig. So January 08, Paula Boggs Band was not only a thing, but we were performing. I stayed at Starbucks another 4 years after that. But with each passing month, I knew I was called to do something different. But I wanted to, it was really important for me, and this is a message I like to leave for your people, is it was so important for me to dismount in the right way. Leaving something is sort of like gymnastics. You can do triple flips and be the best thing since sliced bread, but if you flub the dismount, that's what people remember, right? And I was not going to, I thought about it, but it was not my time to leave Starbucks when, Obama was running for president in 08, which was the guy. For me, in my lifetime, he was the guy. And I ultimately did volunteer for him in 2012. But 08 was not the time. 08 was not the time because Starbucks was still in the throes of a recession. People forget that because Starbucks has been so wildly successful since then, before then, and since then. But in that 07, 08, 09 timeframe, Starbucks was really fighting for its life, right? And I was not going to leave Starbucks that way. By the time I left in 2012, Starbucks was well on its way to the Starbucks we see today. It was swinging. It had figured a lot of stuff out. And importantly for me, I had groomed two people I believed could do my job. I did not believe that in '08, but by 2012, I did. And that's what I told Howard Schultz. I have no control over who you pick following me, but I know what I needed to do, which was prepare this company for choices, internal choices. And I've done that. And thus my job is done. And the company did pick one of those people. Lucy Helm followed me as general counsel, someone who'd worked for me for a decade.
Wow. I love the takeaway of making sure your dismount is one that it's kind of like when people say don't burn bridges, but not in that same way. Not in the same way. Like, I'm always like, some of them need to be burned, but that's not the point. This how you leave impacts your brand too.
Yes.
Because it's a part of your legacy and it's a part of your story, right? And so if you have done all these fantastic things, but then you're like, bye. I don't care what happens to you. then you're right. And I love that as a takeaway because I don't think so. People don't talk about that part as often. They really talk about the meat of when you're someplace, but not the how you make sure it's going to be okay. And I think it's a true mark of leadership and good leaders to be able to say, this is my legacy. It's also the way you mentor and it's how you advise also when you're leaving too. So that is a fantastic takeaway. Speaking of which, let's talk about leadership. Given all the things you've already told, and I'm sitting here truly, and my listeners know they can hear when I'm in awe because I'm like, but it is knowing all that you've known and seeing leadership in all these different, literally the White House, actually in the military, all of these different places, and being in leadership in all these organizations. What are the characteristics? What are the attributes of a good leader to you?
We hear this term bandied around a lot, but when a leader truly believes it and internalizes it, I believe amazing things happen. And the term is servant leadership. So when I got to Starbucks, I was not a servant leader. I was like, hey, I'm in my early 40s. I'm, general counsel of, this iconic Fortune 500 company. I'm pretty hot, right? That was the sort of mindset I had when I got to Starbucks. So within, I don't know, 6 months of joining Starbucks, the CEO at the time, Warren Smith, loved him. The late Warren Smith calls me into his office and starts with, Paula, you and I are a lot alike. Okay, I don't know where he's going with this. What is this? And he says, and he was this, sort of avuncular, wise guy. And I don't think I ever saw Warren get angry. But so here we are, him and me. And he says, you and I are a lot alike. We've both made a lot of sacrifices to get to the top of our, respective careers. I'm at the top of mine. You're at the top of yours. But here's the deal. The skills, the tactics, the techniques that got us to the mountaintop may not be those things that best serve us now that we're here. Okay, that's what he said to me. And so, of course, initially I was offended. I was defensive. I was offended. I was like, what? This guy doesn't know me. What is he talking about? Blah, blah, blah. But he did know me. And he was calling it as he saw it. And over, time, I was able to receive that message. Not initially, but over time, I was. And the organization I was honored to lead was the beneficiary of me getting that message and internalizing it, because it changed dramatically the lens through which I saw what I was doing and why I was doing. So I've been gone from Starbucks over a decade, right? But people still come up to me, both people who worked for me, people who never worked for me, who have come after I left, people who were my peers or worked in, organizations, sales, HR, you name it.
Yeah.
And they say, Paula, the department is still your department. And what they mean by that, I mean, it's not my department. I mean, it has had, 3 or 4 general counsels since I left, right? But the values of law and corporate affairs remain. The values of, treating each other with respect and dignity, the values of centering the organization in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making that everybody's story. That's what they mean by that. And if the question presented is, what is your legacy? What did you want your legacy to be? It is that. That's what I wanted. And the beauty of the afterlife, the post Paula, not just Starbucks, but what has happened with people who were part of that thing, the decade I was there, is so many of them have become general counsel themselves across the country. Actually, not just the United States, but some have become general counsel in Europe or in Asia. And they, as general counsel, have, in wherever they're working now, been guided by, because they tell me, Paula, in my organization, diversity, equity, and inclusion is central to how I lead. They tell me this. That's the only reason I know. And so I know that whatever effort I put in to Starbucks is something that keeps giving. It has life well beyond anything I could possibly have imagined.
Well, I mean, my listeners will remember. So Sabrina was on the podcast, and she talked about mentoring and diversity and all of those things that are the values and ethos of Starbucks. And so we have the pleasure of actually hearing about a lot of the catalysts of that culture building and seeing some of the subsequent things that have come from it. And so I love hearing that background. And I'll say personally, you and I spoke at the same conference. I don't know how many years ago that was. It was for Miss JD. And I remember somebody was like, yeah, Paula this, Paula this. And I was like, why are they saying my name? I'm sitting right here. Like, I'm like, I'm Paula. And they're like, there's another Paula. And I was like, another Paula. Speaking of brand, I'm like, but that's my name. But so I said, who's this Paula? And I will never forget hearing you speak. And you spoke then, and I remember I was like, "Oh my God, she's so great!" And you didn't even give half of the story that you've given today. Like it was a snippet, but you were so passionate about authenticity. And I mean, it still sits with me because I was like, "Gosh, I can't imagine." I mean, again, I think my listeners know that I can only show up as Paula. Like this is who I am, but you give people bravery, permission, a path to own their authenticity. And I want to take a personal privilege to be able to say, I thank you for that, because I remember being like, well, if she can do it, her name is Paula too. I can do it as well. Like we're going to be. And so, your impact, because you asked the question, you said about like, your impact is profound. Because I told somebody else I was going to be interviewing. I was like, I'm so excited, I'm going to interview. And they're like, you have no idea. Now I realize what they were talking about, because you have been through hills and valleys and done all this stuff. But, it's not so often that people get flowers when they're here. And so let this be a time where I say to you that you should know, and I'm glad people keep telling you that you have profound impact. And I'm going to take another point. Being a musician, coming from doing all the things you've done, if someone were to say to me like, Paula, hey, you can do X, Y, Z, I'd be like, no. LOL, I could not. But you show people that you can be a lot of things. Like if there was a Paula Boggs Barbie doll, you would have a lot of outfits. Like a lot of outfits. So I knew that this conversation was going to be great. And so I'm going to, number one, say to you, I would love to have you on at another time so we can talk about some more. But because this is the time that I always say to my folks, 3 questions that I have to ask you at the end of this, with the hope that we have a chance to talk again. 1, what do you do for fun, Paula? And don't say play the guitar.
What do I do for fun? I do a lot of things for fun. I mean, music is my job now, but it also brings me tremendous joy, right? And when I'm cooking on all cylinders, it's bringing other people joy too, and I feed off their joy, right? As do other members of the band. So that is certainly a source of joy. Family is very important to me, and we're for the most part a loud Black family and a loud Jewish family, and and we laugh a lot, we tell jokes. There are a lot of, I'm not one of them, but there are many funny people in my family. And so I enjoy the humor. My brother, Cornell, who some of your listeners may know, is an incredibly funny man. I mean, he's, he has this demeanor of, sort of like the Black Clark Kent kind of thing. But he is a very funny guy. And, and so I cherish, every moment I get to spend with him, because among the things, I know I'm going to laugh.
Wait a minute. I just remembered I saw you all speak. Am I remembering this? Are you twins?
We're not. I mean, we're virtually. We're 13 months.
I was like,
apart.
Okay.
Yeah, we're 13 months apart.
There's something that I'm forgetting. Okay, good. All right. Yes. Gosh.
And we look alike.
I realize I've been fangirling you for a really long time. So I'm having a moment. Okay. My next question is this. Stand by your brand. So what is an element of your brand that you will never compromise on?
Authenticity.
Yeah.
I think people expect that from me, and I expect it of myself. And as I was saying to somebody recently in law, I recognize I'm in a catbird's seat in the following way when it comes to law, because I no longer practice law and I'm beholden to no one. I can deliver messages that others might not be able to deliver because they've got a boss or they've got whatever and I have none of that. So there is absolutely no excuse for me when it comes to law and the law profession to just speak my truth
Mhm.
100% unvarnished. And I recognize that's a gift.
Mhm.
And I want to honor that gift because I know there are people who wish they could,
Yeah.
but for whatever reason can't.
Mhm.
And I want to be that not just for myself,
Mhm.
but for them too.
Hmm. Yes, there's a lot of things in the law that need to be said. I'll leave it at that because, yeah. So my podcast's name is Branding Room Only, which is a play on the word standing room only. And so, and for you as a musician, this might be a very even more interesting answer. What is the aspect about you? What is the experience of Paula Boggs that somebody would be in a room with only standing room to experience?
That's the joy. Getting back to the joy when we perform, some of the songs are sad,
Mhm.
certainly,
Mhm.
but we always begin and end with joy. And it is palpable. People feel that because it's authentic. It's not an act. We feel joyful. And Paula, I can't tell you how many people over the years have come to us after a show or whatever and
Mhm.
said, I feel better now
Mm.
than when I walked in the room. You give me hope, right? So that is really the most important part of my brand because yeah, the songwriting is masterful, you look good on stage, whatever, those are great things to hear and to feel and whatnot.
Mhm.
But if we and I personally can
Mhm.
bring joy
Mhm.
into the space wherever we are, and
Mhm.
I feel that same way about public speaking.
Mhm.
If I can spark joy,
Mhm.
then I've I've accomplished the mission.
Well, without knowing this, my listeners who have you know been here for a good time, a good long time, know that my word of the year is joy this year. And so, Paula, you have brought me extreme joy as my guest and hearing your story and hearing your takeaways. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. Everybody, go run tell all the friends and even your enemies. I don't care who, they need to hear about Paula Boggs and how we had this Paula times two collabo. And so all of you download, follow, share, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for being in the branding room. I appreciate you so much, Paula.
Thanks for having me, Paula. Take care, everyone.
That, my friends, was Paula Boggs, veteran, visionary, and voice of truth. On this Memorial Day, I hope this conversation offered not only inspiration, but a moment to pause, to honor those who have served and sacrificed, and to reflect on how each of us can lead with greater integrity, purpose, and courage. Thank you again, Paula, for sharing your story, your leadership, and your light with us. And thank you to all who serve, have served, or support someone who has. As always, I am grateful that you spent some time with me in the branding room. If you found this episode meaningful, and I hope you have, I'd love for you to leave a review at ratemypodcast.com/branding. It really helps others to discover the show and to spread the love. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other, and remember, stand by your brand. See ya.